Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at a truly profound paradox. On one hand, you have Japan, a country with an intense, decades-long desire to internationalize and, really integrate into the global community. But on the other hand, it has this incredibly powerful, almost instinctual drive to protect its domestic identity from outside influence. It is a fascinating push and pull dynamic, and we're going to explore exactly how this plays out inside the country's classrooms and universities.
So let's just dive right in by posing our core question here. How does a global economic powerhouse struggle so deeply with internationalization? Japan's economic prowess is completely undeniable. Yet when we actually look at metrics like English language proficiency or global academic integration, there's just immense documented friction. Why is it that a nation that exports its technology and culture so effortlessly to the rest of the world has such a hard time absorbing the world back into its own educational system?
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the push for internationalization, culture clash in the classroom, Japan's cultural immune response, dynamism without risk, and finally, adapting to global realities.
All right, starting with part one, the push for internationalization, the political drive for global engagement.
To really get this, we got to talk about the term kokusaikai. This became a massive buzzword back in the 1980s, basically meaning internationalization. Political and business leaders realized that to thrive, Japan needed to forge a new role in the world and earn the trust of the international community. But, well, there was a catch. Even as they pushed for this global trust, government policy statements continually referred to the outside world as a harsh, unpredictable, and risky place. So they absolutely wanted to engage, but they were simultaneously completely on the defensive.
And you can see this clearly under Prime Minister Nakasone in the 1980s. His ad hoc council laid out these 5 deliberate categories for international education. They wanted to develop global citizens and promote exchange, sure, but notice the control here. They carefully managed exactly how foreigners learned Japanese and how Japanese children returning from overseas were reintegrated. It wasn't just throwing the doors open. It was a very structured, top-down approach to managing global engagement.
Moving right along to section 2. Culture clash in the classroom, BANA versus TCEP.
So, to understand this clash, we need to look at what anthropologists call anthropological culture. It's those taken-for-granted, day-to-day practices that really define a group. Think of a classroom as a microcosm of the outside world. It basically operates on a cultural iceberg model, where the visible behaviors you see in the classroom are entirely dictated by these massive, hidden societal beliefs lurking right beneath the surface.
And this cultural iceberg creates a direct collision when Japan tries to import Western teaching methods. Take communicative language teaching, or CLT, for example. CLT was developed in Western nations and expects students to be active, egalitarian, individualistic negotiators of meaning. But the Japanese classroom reality? It is steeped in traditional Confucian culture. It's incredibly teacher-fronted. The teacher is the absolute authority, and the expectation is passive, conformist listening. You don't just speak unless spoken to, and prioritizing your individual voice over the harmony of the group is really frowned upon.
The crucial point here is how deeply this psychology of conformity works, and it starts early. Japanese mothers will often warn their kids that someone is watching to prevent conspicuous behavior. They invoke the concept of hazukashi, or being ashamed, to emphasize when behavior just doesn't meet group expectations. So imagine taking a student raised to literally fear standing out and suddenly dropping them into a Western-style language class where they are forced to perform, speak up, and be the center of attention. It simply doesn't compute.
That brings us to section 3, Japan's cultural immune response, assimilation or exclusion.
Educational sociologists Karia and Rapley frame this whole reaction to globalization perfectly. They call it an immune response. Instead of borders becoming permeable and welcoming to foreign influence, the system acts exactly like a human body fighting off a virus. It actively works to protect Japanese identity from what it perceives as cultural contagion. It's fascinating.
Let's ground this abstract theory with a very specific real-world example, the Kikukushi-jo, or returnee students. These are Japanese kids who have lived abroad and are highly fluent in English. Now, when they return to the Japanese school system, you'd think they'd be celebrated, right? Like the ultimate success story of kokusaikai. Actually, no. The conformist pressure is so intense that a lot of these students purposely fake a thick Japanese accent when speaking English. They literally hide their fluency to avoid standing out and facing what's basically tissue rejection from their peers and the school system.
And get this immune response applies to adults entering the country too. Look at this number, 3.
Back in February 2010, out of 254 foreign nurses brought into Japan to help with severe staff shortages, only 3 passed the demanding Japanese nursing exam. These nurses had to work full, exhausting shifts while simultaneously trying to master wildly complex Japanese medical terminology. It perfectly illustrates Japan's severe sink-or-swim assimilation policy. You either perfectly assimilate into the Japanese system or you are excluded entirely. There's really no in-between.
All right, let's pivot to Section 4, Dynamism Without Risk, the 2004 University Big Bang. So, in 2004, the government attempted to jolt national universities out of their domestic complacency by turning them into independent agencies. But, as discussed in papers like this one from Shiga University's Center for Risk Research, these institutions actually function as a risk society. Because they've been shielded by the state for decades, university employees and administrators are absolutely terrified of market forces, privatization, and really any external evaluation.
When the OECD evaluated these 2004 reforms, their critique was incredibly sharp. They found that Japanese universities desperately lacked top academic management skills. Instead of bold leadership, there is this massive herd instinct, where universities anxiously look at what everybody else is doing before making any decisions, which essentially paralyzes them. On top of that, traditional professors' councils hold huge veto power over reforms, but, and here's the kicker, they bear zero responsibility for the financial consequences of those vetoes. They desperately want to be globally competitive, but they are trapped in a completely risk-averse protectionist culture. Which brings us to the core paradox of university reform. As the OECD pointed out in 2009, the government and the universities want the rewards of a dynamic, cosmopolitan, internationally recognized system, but they want it without taking any actual risks. They literally want dynamism without risk. And, as any entrepreneur will tell you, innovation and global integration fundamentally require stepping into the unknown and risking failure. You can't really have one without the other.
Finally, Section 5, Adapting to Global Realities, a Path Forward.
The key takeaway from all this research is actually pretty simple. Adapt rather than adopt. Simply importing Western methodologies, whether we're talking about language teaching or university management, and just dropping them into Japan uncut, will inevitably trigger that cultural immune response we talked about. Instead, researchers suggest Japan needs a weak version of communicative language teaching, meaning respecting the local culture of learning. Instead of forcing highly self-conscious students to perform solo oral presentations, teachers can use collaborative, group-based problem-solving tasks in English. It allows students to negotiate meaning together, buried safely within the harmony of the group. It's about adapting the global standard to actually fit the Japanese cultural context. But even with these adaptations, we have to ask ourselves a final, pretty heavy question. Can a system truly achieve global dynamism without taking risks? Can Japan genuinely internationalize its education system while cautiously shielding its cultural identity from the very world it seeks to join? It is a massive balancing act, and it's one that will absolutely define Japan's trajectory in the 21st century.